What's up? I'm Zach,
I'm Braden, and we're Science.
and we're here on the Nebula Music Podcast.
All right, what is up, everybody? Eddie Barco here once again. And for those of you joining me for the first time, this is the Nebula Music Podcast. This is a show where we talk about some of the coolest things going on in the music industry, and we invite some of the coolest musicians, artists, entrepreneurs, whoever's doing something really cool in the music industry, we have them on the show. Hopefully, to pick their brain for a couple of minutes so that we can learn something new. And today is definitely a very exciting episode because we have not one but two guests who are doing really cool things, who are making amazing music, and I can't wait to pick their brains for a little bit. We have Braden and Zach from Syence joining us today. How are you two doing?
Doing well. How are you doing?
Doing well.
I am doing excellent. I know we were talking a little bit beforehand. I am currently dog sitting, and it is definitely fun to be around a cute little dog. And I'm anticipating that he doesn't come in and bite me in the leg, but he's super adorable. One question I've been asking a lot of guests that have been on the show, because it's just an important topic, and I'm sure you've been asked this a couple times, but I'm curious for you two. You guys are succeeding very fast, and we will definitely get into the kind of music you guys are making very soon. But like I was mentioning, this is a topic that I do think it's very important at this moment, is how have you two been holding up, with this whole entire situation that the world finds itself in. I find it very fascinating. There are many different kinds of musicians who have dealt with this in a very different way. So for you two, I'm just simply wondering, has everything been okay? Do you guys find yourselves very creative, or maybe you guys feel stuck creatively? I don't know, but in general, how's everything with you two?
I mean, I think the pandemic's obviously hurt a lot of us in a lot of different ways, and it's definitely not something that we want to continue by any means. But I feel like for Syence, we've actually probably kind of got a lot of benefit from the pandemic, in the sense of kind of being able to focus our attention on our music and on our art, and kind of developing who we are as artists and what we're trying to accomplish without having all of the other distractions that are out there. Everything from the weekends and shows and socializing as much and things like that. So I actually think that the pandemic has sort of reset us and given us a lot of energy and momentum in the right direction, because we sort of got to step back and say, all right, we're not going to be playing any shows or touring anytime soon. What can we focus on to grow Syence? And we actually were able to create a ton of music in this time that we're really proud of, that hasn't come out yet, but everyone will hear it eventually. And we've been able to focus on rebranding ourselves and really diving into the visual side of Syence. So for me, and I think I'm speaking for Braden as well, I feel like as much as the pandemic has been awful and we want it to end so we can get back to normal life, it has actually been kind of a positive for Syence specifically.
Yeah, I would just say it was only kind of weird at the very beginning when we went from having, two studio sessions a week together and obviously being able to see each other and play shows on weekends and stuff. And then it went from that to absolutely nothing. And I think we went like 2 months with not seeing each other once and sort of working remotely, but trying to figure out a good workflow for us. And then after we kind of like realized how long this was going to be happening, we really thought about our process and what we could do to make the most of it. And I think we entered the pandemic maybe with a couple songs that were finished. And, we were trying to figure out how to go through some sort of a rebrand and how we could build out a team to back us and get some serious momentum going. And now at the end of the pandemic, basically we've rebranded. We're sitting on like 12 finished songs. We have an entire team now supporting Syence, which you can get into later if we need to. But it's pretty crazy to look back and see where we were, what we were hoping to do, and then now what we've achieved, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. We thought it was going to be extremely difficult to do anything meaningful, but we found a way, I think. So we're pretty excited.
Yeah, I'm happy for you too, because it seems like even though this whole entire moment in time, even though it's going to be a big moment in history, there has been a lot of artists like yourself that have managed to pull through and create really cool things. I still remember, man. I remember like back in March when people were saying that it was going to last, like 3, 4, maybe 3 weeks. People were like, yeah, it's not going to be that long. And then, it hit June. And I think that's when, for me at least, it became very apparent this is a semi-permanent thing, and it completely blew my mind. But I'm glad that for you two, it gave you the freedom to explore, which is important, and I find that a lot of people in this moment gave them the opportunity to explore avenues in music that they never would have. For example, There is an artist that came on the show not that long ago, Kayvon, who's a very, very cool guy, very, very talented. But he's known for like very heavy music, right? Very just heavy electronic music, not necessarily in your realm, but very similar. And then because of the pandemic, he sort of explored more like happy, lighter music, which is not anywhere in his environment. So for you two, you guys keep mentioning, a rebrand and it gave you opportunity to do that. I'm wondering, where was Syence before the pandemic in terms of like your identity, the sound you were making, and where is it going since you guys used this time to kind of try to discover different directions, if that makes sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think Syence before, like, there's a couple ways to look at it. Like, who was Syence? What was the team? And then, like, what was the branding? What was like the vision, so to speak? And I mean, the team, we were fully independent. We didn't have management, didn't have an agent. We had an advisor, Tu and Roy, who at the time was with Universal, leading their digital venture department. He has since switched over to Proxima Media. So he was kind of giving us, some advice and helping guide us through some discussions and some, I guess, connections in the industry. But we really were doing everything ourselves. I mean, in terms of day to day and like facilitating the various processes behind releasing music and coordinating shows, things like that. So it was just a lot of extra work, and we just really didn't have anyone supporting us. Right? It was just all us for the most part. From a music perspective, we had an idea of the sound we wanted to go for. We knew we wanted to kind of create this genre in bass pop, which we can get into more later as well. But we hadn't really quite nailed it, in my opinion. We had a couple songs that were in that realm, but we were also releasing music that didn't really feel like bass pop as much, or didn't feel as much like Syence. So we were still crafting that sound. The branding, we really didn't have any. We had no general direction on like what we were trying to do from like the social perspective, from like, cohesiveness with our cover arts or video content. I mean, it was really all over the place, and we kind of took it on one song at a time. And to be honest, like when we would post it, we were just kind of getting images up to get them up on Instagram, for example. There was no meaning behind the art itself or the aesthetic or anything like that. And it's not that we didn't want that. We just really hadn't figured out a way to go about it. And I think, again, the pandemic kind of opened our minds to really focusing on that. And then luckily we found new management who connected us with an agency that helped with branding, and they kind of helped us craft the direction that we're at now. And I'll kind of let Zach chime in there on, where we're at now and anything else he thinks I may have missed on like the past of Syence.
Yeah, I mean, I think just like a good way to look at it as artists, I mean, it happened to line up with the pandemic, but I think we've been working as Syence for a few years now, and we finally got to that point where, we could step away from the music we were making and just be like, what else is Syence, right? Like, what else do we need to flesh out in order to build something that, our fans and future fans are really just invested in and want to be a part of? And I think that just happened to line up just where we were as partners, and as music, as our music developed just with the pandemic. So in that time frame, there's been so much that's happened because Braden and I have really just evolved as creatives and as a business to figure all that stuff out. But yeah, I mean, everything you said pretty much touch on it. I would add, yeah, like where we are now, I know myself in particular, I've spent a lot of time focusing on the art side of Syence beyond the music, and kind of the visual side, and what we're trying to accomplish, like in an ideal world, what our different various futures in the industry are going to look like. And fortunately, we've been able to work with some really talented people and a lot of help to flesh that stuff out to a much more professional level, into something that we're actually proud of and excited and inspired by to move forward. So yeah, so right now we're just we've rebranded in the sense that we have a direction, we know what we're trying to build, we have cohesive imagery, assets on like all the various social medias. We're really trying to build like a world that no matter what we put into it, it all feels cohesive and it all feels elevated and what we're trying to get across. And I think we're just now starting to, I think, really turn a page into a whole nother lane of how cool that's going to be and how successful I think that's going to be for us, and for our fans, to be able to join a community like that and be a part of it.
Yeah, and we've really always had, sorry, just to add there, we've really always had like these ideas cooking in the back burner, but because pre-pandemic there were so many things going on, we were actually putting out music more, we were playing shows, there was more day-to-day stuff we were having to manage ourselves. We just never really got around to actually like sitting down, executing the ideas and building this direction. And it's just been really exciting to finally see a path forward to like building this world that's really important to us, that is science and everything that comes with it.
I love that. And let me ask you this. Do you feel like the decision to expand a little bit, like we've been describing rebranding and kind of growing from there, this is a topic that actually comes up quite a bit, not with every artist, but with quite a few independent artists that I've had the pleasure to talk with and interact with and work with. There is always this constant juggle, I guess I would say, not a struggle. It's definitely more of a juggle between the moment where you're independent, where you like do everything yourselves, and then the moment when you realize maybe it's time to get more people on board to help us create this cohesive picture. Some people are very much anti that, and some people are open to it. And it sounds like you guys were very open to it and are very happy with the rebrand you guys made. I'm wondering, that decision to expand, I guess you can say, to really grow and rebrand, it sounds like you two were on the same page and you knew exactly that you needed to do it. But I'm really wondering, was that like a gradual decision, or did the pandemic just like made it absolutely abundantly clear that, hey, this is what we got to do? I'm not so sure, but I'm just trying to get a better picture of that decision, because it's not an easy one. And I love that you guys are growing and you guys are on the same page and know exactly where you want to go. But for some artists, that's a very hard place to get to, especially if they're independent. So I'm just a little curious how that came to be for you two.
I think like it's definitely been slow moving in the sense that I feel like ever since we started working together, we've always had a future vision that resembled the artists we look up to, who do have these fantastic brands and fantastic music and big fantastic teams that help them. So we knew that there was just an element of reality we had to come to, which is that in order to physically have enough hours in the day to do what you need to do, you need more than just two people, right? Like there is no such thing as a super successful high level musical act that's literally two people, right? There's always going to be help. And it's just a reality of there's only so many hours in the day. And we were focusing everything into our music and into growing that and just getting that to a point that we're really happy with, which is awesome for us because it's really made our music awesome. And I think that's important because without awesome music, you can't expect anything else to work out for you. But I think it was just kind of Braden and I both have very business oriented backgrounds. Braden works for Adobe right now. I
Oh,
run an
cool.
online music school. And so we've been kind of entrepreneurs and building businesses our whole lives pretty much. And so I think we always knew that there was a level of the science project that needed to be, a business, not just like two guys making cool music. No matter how cool that
Mm.
music is, we knew that like we were going to need to build something bigger if we wanted to actually make this like a career that we could, do long term. And we've known that for a while. I think it's, like I said, I think it was the perfect moment in our careers, both as artists and as businessmen, to understand what we need and to attack it. And I think, for everything that was going on, I think we've executed that extremely well. And luckily, we've had a little bit of luck along the way in terms of, certain relationships kind of almost being handed to us by the universe. You could say like it wasn't
Yeah.
necessarily like we went out and sought, our current management or our current advisor. It kind of just was the perfect storm of events. And I feel like we've navigated those initial events to a place now where it seems like, yeah, it's like I can't even remember not being with the team we're with right now. It feels like it's been a lifetime, but really realistically, it's really only been like a year, right? And that's like not a lot of time at all.
Yeah, and I think just like leading up to where we are now, I mean, as Zach mentioned, we have full-time jobs that we've been balancing with science since day one. And it's left us in a place where we're very fortunate to be financially stable, especially during the pandemic. So what that's allowed us to do is be very patient with the growth of science, but also very I guess particular in how we grow science. So for example, there's never been an instance where we are focused on getting a quick buck to afford rent, right? Like we already have money coming
Yeah.
in elsewhere. So every time there's opportunities that present themselves to us, we don't think about the quick financial gain. We think about, how is this going to like benefit the long-term success of science? How is this going to get us to a point where it is all we do day in and day out? And that patience has helped us really wait for that perfect storm of opportunities. And the first of those perfect opportunities came right around May or so when we were approached by who is now our new management, Big Night Talent out of Boston, the Boston area. And we weren't necessarily like desperate for management. Again, we were trying to be very patient, wait for that right opportunity. But with that team, they came to us with the idea of helping coordinate and facilitate a rebrand through a partner of theirs, Big Mind Creative, which ended up being perfect. I mean, they've done some amazing work in the past and did amazing work on kind of reformatting and rethinking the way Syence, I guess, goes to market publicly, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
then from there, Tuin, our advisor, helped coordinate a relationship with Hitco, which is the new label we've been working with on our most recent release. And, we had some other labels on the table for certain releases. But again, because we were able to be patient and wait for that right opportunity, Hitco ended up coming in, and that's one of the best, if not the best labels we've worked with to date. And then from there, Tim, our manager, and that management team also introduced us to Paradigm and Lee Anderson, who's now our agent. So again, there was agent opportunities in the past that just didn't feel quite right. And if we didn't have that financial stability, maybe we would have taken it back then. But because we were able to really be patient, I think it allowed, again, for this perfect storm of all these opportunities, this team being built, and they really all feel like the perfect pieces to the puzzle. And we feel like there's a lot of good stuff to come from that.
Oh, absolutely. You had so many cool topics that I really wish we had a couple hours to explore because I love you too. And I love the way you guys approach music. And we will definitely touch up on some of the creative stuff that you're doing. But I just want to take a second to like pick at this just for a quick second, because in my experience, and I'm sure you two have experienced this too, maybe from other people, there is this sort of understanding amongst many musicians that in order to quote unquote make it or to be able to create something sustainable, that you have to give everything up in order to do this full time. I'm sure you guys have come across people like that too. I myself, like you, I'm a bit of an entrepreneur too, so I've always been a little bit of an oddball when it comes to the music circle, because I have many hands and many different pies, and it is strange to meet individuals who work full time and also have a successful music career. In my opinion, I don't see that very often, but I love seeing it when I do, because it shows that when you focus your time, you know exactly what to do whenever. But I also love that you bring up this fact that you don't really need to give up everything, especially if you have finances taken care of. You can focus on the right choices that will bring you exactly where you need to go. And I just got to take a moment to think that's really cool. I really love that you guys do that. To each his own. I'm not saying the other way isn't right either. I'm just saying I really commend you guys for like owning that, because I think it's good and it shows in your ability to create. And so,
Yeah, and I think you got to look at it like there's pros and cons to both options, right? Like if you don't have a full-time job, you have way more time probably to focus on your art, way more, energy too, most likely, right? There's definitely days where you get off work and you're like, oh my God, there's no way I'm going to go write some music. I'm exhausted or whatever. The cons would be, it takes more than just time and energy to invest in your project. There is financial needs a lot of the times. There was a TikTok yesterday where the guy was freaking out because he was like calculating all of his expenses for like promo and art and mixing and mastering and all this stuff, right? And so it's they're the pros of the other end of the spectrum is you have a lot more stability to invest in your project, and you also learn a lot of things, balancing these two things in terms of time management, and sometimes you gain skills from your job that you can actually translate to the way you operate your music project, which I know both Zach and I certainly have taken a lot of our knowledge from college and our jobs and applied it to Syence in really positive ways. So you just really got to know what works for you. I think there's really no rules in music, as I'm sure you know, and you just got to do what makes you comfortable and what you think works. And eventually, yes, if you do and if you are successful, there is going to be a day where you probably need to give one of them up, ideally the full-time job or whatever. But it doesn't mean you have to do it from day one. There's usually a time and place where it makes sense, and luckily our team is very supportive of both, and they're helping us get there as best we can, but they're not forcing us by any means either, which I really like.
Yeah, and I would just add, Braden and I have had a lot of experience, I think, in our lives just juggling a lot. I mean, it's actually, I was just thinking about it, and it's literally been about a decade since we started college together when we first met. And, we both studied engineering in school and also managed to juggle like pretty extensive social lives. And Braden had like a job at one point. So we've just kind of always been, I can feel like since we became adults, juggling a lot of stuff. And I think that kind of work ethic and the ability to just get a lot done, frankly, in a day has really helped us. And then you add to the fact that we're in a duo, so there's two of us. And then you also add to the fact that both of us are extremely motivated and kind of in that same position, it sort of makes us kind of like a super group in terms of what we can get done compared to what I would assume like the average solo artist who maybe hasn't had like that long of experience juggling a lot of stuff. It can make it a lot more challenging, and you kind of feel like you have to jump in one way or the other. But I think that's also what's great about Syence and about where we're heading is that because of this unique position we find ourselves in now after having, you know, been developing the project for many, many years, but really only being able to see it through to a more professional and serious level more recently. We just, we have a unique situation, and, we're able to navigate it pretty well, and we haven't had many issues up until this point, and we feel like things are getting, it's almost in a weird way, they're getting more complicated and more time intensive, but it feels like they're getting easier because we do have these other people involved with the project helping out and who are all really passionate and all really smart and all really good at what they do. And so, really it's all just very exciting for us. And there's obviously still a lot of unknowns, but we're excited and we think that we're gonna be able to handle it.
I love it. And you guys both speak like true businessmen. I love that. I think that's, again, to each his own, and everyone needs to understand who they are. But I love the way you guys speak, and that's kind of cool. And since we're in that topic of, how you guys met, I'm actually kind of curious. I know people have probably asked about your story, how you guys started and you guys met in college, that stuff. I'm kind of curious to explore that a little bit, but also how you guys ended up in the genre that you're in, because it is a very I would say now it is a more popular genre, but I would maybe 5-10 years ago definitely was not, which is more like bass pop, that whole side of things. And I'm not sure if that's where you guys started, but I'm curious to learn a little bit more about how you two linked up and why did you go into the genre that you are currently in or were in at the time.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I can say like we originally met in college in a science class. That's partly why we call ourselves Syence. We met in like chemistry class freshman year, and we just became good friends. I think we both were really into the band Blink 182. That was like one of our biggest like inspirations growing up musically. And so we kind of bonded over that. We actually originally the music we were making, we were just kind of like messing around as complete amateurs in Logic 9 at the time, I think it was. Super old, and we literally I had like a bass guitar, and we were basically just plugging in a bass, writing songs with that and like stock synths. I didn't even know what EQs were. We didn't know what like anything like technical was. We were literally just making music, and we did that for a long time, probably made like 50 to 100 songs just like that, which I think kind of put us into a good place in terms of like composition, like just understanding music in general. And it really kind of just felt like our first version of Syence, the first band. And then eventually, Braden got really into DJing because he was in a fraternity and he was kind of like in that world. And I got really into producing electronic music and switched over to Ableton. And, at the time we hadn't, this was like 2012, 2013. So inspirations were like artists like Skrillex and Zed and Dylan Francis and Porter Robinson. And these guys were making like heavy electronic music at the time. I guess there's multiple genres, but it was much more aggressive and definitely not pop leaning in any way. And, I think like I've just always had a super strong connection to lyrics and to more popular music and, artists, everything from like someone like the Beatles to like a more modern, like boy bands and things like that. Like I just have always found that stuff to be interesting to be able to connect beyond just production, but also with like the songwriting and stuff. So I always kind of knew that as an artist, just myself, I would want to involve a more pop leaning side of whatever type of music I made. But we just happened to get a lot better at producing electronic music because it's just kind of a whole different world. And I really think it was like artists like, the Chainsmokers and Louis the Child who kind of like have bridged that gap really well.
Yeah.
Have helped us realize that there's a middle ground, right? There's a place where we can kind of do both. And, we just sort of started going down that lane from day one. And I think we've been doing that now for several years. So we've just gotten a lot better at it. Whereas I feel like there was kind of this wave in the early 2010s, I guess, where artists were starting out super electronic. And then because electronic music got so popular, they had bigger fan bases. And then they started to kind of go a little more pop. Whereas we didn't really have a huge fan base. So we kind of just started with the pop electronic crossover right at the beginning. And I think that has kind of been a difference maker because we've been able to dive into that sound and evolve it for us as artists a lot further than I think someone who's like super focused on electronic music for many, many, many years and then decides to start putting in like pop vocals on top and being like, oh, now I'm making like crossover stuff. So I think that's sort of been a big different differentiation. I know Braden will probably have stuff to say as well because we are both very different too. Like Braden likes tons of music that I'm not super into. I like stuff that he's not super into, but we're really good at communicating what we do like and coming to agreements with stuff. So it ends up making cool, interesting kind of hybrid things that I think wouldn't otherwise happen.
Yeah, Zach nailed it for sure. And I think, where he left off is kind of like what got us to where we are today. So, I mean, a couple years ago, we were making like, pop inspired electronic music, but most songs either blended into some existing genre or sounded similar to a multitude of artists, if you looked at five of our most recent releases, they'd all kind of like fit into different sound types or whatever. There was just no cohesiveness, to be honest, in the sound. And that's because we were just still trying to figure out who Syence was. And as we started figuring that out, I can't remember what song it was or what session we were in, but the idea just kind of dawned on us that like the best way we can create timeless music where people remember Syence forever, which has really been our goal since day one, is to create timeless music, is to create some unique sound that is very identifiable and just makes people realize the second the song plays that it's a Syence track, right? Skrillex sort of invented dubstep, or did. It's hard to say exactly who did, but he was one of the founding fathers, so to speak. Jaws kind of coined the bass house genre. Flume was one of the first people to make future bass, which blew up, as you know, after that tennis court remix.
Yep.
So our goal was to try to find, at the very least, some unique sound that made everyone realize it was Syence. But then as we started to explore that, we realized there was an opportunity to basically coin our own subgenre. And that's really where bass pop was born in our eyes. And, I'm not going to take credit and say we're the first ones to ever make a bass pop song. There's definitely songs that already existed that still inspire us today for that genre. But, it is a signature aspect of our sound. And we try to make every song we release fit into that genre, fit into that Syence sound as much as we can, because it really feels like, the true Syence sound after years and years of searching for, what that direction was going to be. So I think that's really where we've evolved, from day one being in Logic and trying to recreate Blink-182 to now, is that pop leaning vocal, that very timeless kind of top line and lyrics with that bass inspired production that feels very commercial and I guess listener friendly. Every now and then we like to get a little more aggressive, especially with our remixes or like our show edits for sure, which is why our live shows I think are so fun, because we really kind of enhance the experience from bass pop into more of a show friendly energy. But overall, that's really our direction now and something we're really stoked on.
Yeah, and I was just gonna add creatively, like with music wise, I feel like like me as an artist, and I know Braden can attest to this too. I love music that like my favorite type of music is the type of music that in no way really alienates anyone. Not to say that music that's more out there or left of center isn't cool and awesome, because all music is awesome. Like there's really no like rules or anything. I just have found myself naturally as an artist starting to get better and better and just more naturally inclined to make decisions that are more I guess not as left leaning, right? Just more acceptable to the masses, something that I feel like most people can understand, that they vibe with. And I think that's just as an artist where me and Braden are. I mean, like we said, one of our biggest inspirations is when we were growing up, we listened to was Blink-182, and they could not be like more anti-left of center, right? They were making the most catchy, poppy version of that genre that could possibly exist.
Yeah.
So we just like got really into hearing that and being like, that makes sense to us. That sounds good. Because ultimately, like producing music, it's really just a bunch of decision making. Like once you know the tools and you understand what you're doing, you're just making a bunch of decisions, and you just have to like trust that your gut is making the right call. And those decisions, we just happen to make very like, I guess, pop decisions with what we do. And we also love and appreciate electronic production. So I think that's kind of where things have just led us to this point, because we just don't really make ideas that aren't bass pop at this point anymore. It's just sort of who we are as artists. It's what our brains are just doing. We can't really even control it. I feel like sometimes, like if you ask us to make like a dubstep song, we probably could, but it certainly wouldn't be the best song that we could make in that period of time. It would just be because it's just not as friendly to us as a art form.
Yeah, and it probably wouldn't feel genuine, to your fans.
You have to be genuine, obviously, and I think we're just lucky that being more pop in terms of like decision making is our genuine selves. Like we're not like trying to make hits necessarily. We obviously want hits, and that's awesome, but I think it's just what we do, and it's what we've kind of always been doing, and like there's no shame in that. And I think it is helping our brand become more commercial and be able to reach more of an audience. Because, I mean, there's fantastic producers and people who are way more talented than us that just make decisions that aren't as pop leaning, right? They just make they like hearing things that are different and crazy unique and all that. And it's not that we don't want to be different, we don't want to be unique. You obviously need that and we want that. I think it's just more like overarching buckets that we restrict that into that make it a little bit more commercial, which is important to us because it's just like always been our goal and our vibe.
Yeah, and you touched on a lot of topics. Both of you guys touched on a lot of really cool points that I think are worth mentioning because there is this big difference between trying to make a hit. And I'm not saying that that doesn't work. Clearly, it works for some people, but it's, so many people are trying to make hits and only a few actually ever succeed with that mindset. And there are those who just understand how to use what they like and mold it in a way where people like it. I mean, there's so many examples in music history where things are just so out of this world, so insanely done that do not make sense on paper, but yet somehow it worked. And that's because it reflects on who made it. Like Queen, for example, is a god at that, making stuff at the time that, on paper would not have worked, but ultimately ended up becoming very much legendary songs that everybody knows and can sing every single word. There's so many examples I can list, but I do think that what you mentioned is very important. That it's important to understand what it is that you like and hone in on that and be able to use that as opposed to, in my opinion, as opposed to just sitting there trying to create a hit. And again, not saying that that's wrong, but I do think that what's important is really honing in on what makes you important. And I think that's what Syence is doing because it's really cool. Every time I listen to your music, it's just catchy. Every single element, I can remember it after just one time hearing it. And I do feel like that reflects your musical tastes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what you mentioned something like you said the word genuine, and I think one part of what makes a song a hit, I think, is a genuine song. Like I feel like humans are smart in the sense that they can hear something and kind of tell if it's forced or tell if it's not, done in a genuine way. And I just think that there are just certain types of artists that make more hit worthy decisions in a genuine way. And then there's certain types of artists that don't. And their genuine way is just not that like acceptable in terms of like broad pop like acceptance, and that's
Yeah.
fine and that's cool. That's why music is so dope as an art form and why art in general is awesome because like the fact that both can exist at the same time, like there can be super alienating versions of it and then there can be super commercial versions of it. I think that's awesome and I wouldn't want it to be any other way. We just fall under the more commercial lane naturally because it's how we are genuinely. We just like that type of music. It's what we've grown up on. It's what we listen to. It's just kind of how we operate as artists.
Yeah, I think like as an emerging artist, you just got to really make sure your music has a piece of you and reflects kind of your flavor of production. Because, where we've seen the most success in our careers is when we've released songs that do feel unique to Syence in terms of the sound and the vibe or whatever. And where we've seen less success is songs, like I mentioned earlier, that just blend into those other genres. So, when you're first trying to discover your sound, I think it's totally fair to kind of, mimic to some extent what inspires you and maybe create a song that is up the alley of some other artists out there. But the more and more you can inject yourself into a song and, hopefully in the future, that perfect storm happens where you get the best vocal possible. You've injected a good amount of yourself into your production and it creates this final product that's unique and kind of stands on its own. That's when you can really create a hit. It's rare that you create a hit by mimicking something else that's already been a hit. That's what's so interesting about the music industry right now is, these songs that are blowing up. I feel like a lot of them, not always all, but a lot of them are unique and they are kind of creating their own wave in terms of sound and I guess the general quality or vibe. A couple examples would be like Medusa came out of nowhere with that Piece of Your Heart track. And like I
Yeah.
feel like there's a million songs coming out every Friday that sound just like it. But nothing's going to beat Piece of Your Heart because when it came out, it just really captured that Medusa vibe and really created its own path. You know what I mean? So that's our goal, is creating something in our own path that can be as big as, Piece of Your Heart, for example.
Yeah, and you bring up some very good points of the way that the music industry has been shaping over the past, I would say even like just 2 years, how much it's changed and how music has been discovered with like apps like TikTok and Triller, where like any cool, unique song, even if it has like a little moment where it's just unique, can completely take over the music industry for like a couple weeks, which is vastly different from what we knew how music would explode, even just like 2 years ago, like I mentioned. And I know you guys have experienced a little bit of that kind of success too. So I'm wondering for your experience, when your song you kind of reached that level of success on, I think it was Triller, if I'm not mistaken. Would you say that you applied those same elements to this song when you guys worked on it, when you made it? You didn't necessarily know what to expect, but it was 100%, reflecting what Syence is all about. Would you say that those elements that we've been talking about, is that the core of this song and why it might have exploded the way it
Yeah,
did?
I mean, I think the way that the song started is the perfect storm for us because we're unique in the sense that, we're not necessarily top liners. We're not the ones that write the lyrics or the vocals. We typically try to find vocals or ideas that resonate with us or are catchy or any combination of that. And in this situation with A Little Bit Bored, which is the track that I think today is sitting number 3 on Billboard for Triller specifically. We had heard the vocal and it was a finished vocal. There was a demo element in the production that was also pretty interesting. But I mean, the vocal itself, we were just like, this is perfect. I mean, it could not be more of a Syence vocal. It was probably, if not the catchiest, one of the catchiest vocals we'd ever heard. The voice was perfect. Ruth crushed it on the writing. The story itself resonated quite a bit. I mean, just this last weekend alone, I've had so many friends reach out to me and say, this reminds me of dating in LA so much. We're in LA and we date in LA, right? So, it's just funny because we've experienced, I think really every person has experienced the story of A Little Bit Bored, whether they were on the receiving or the giving end. So when we get that perfect storm from a vocal perspective of great story, very catchy, great lyrics, great melodies, all the above, plus the demo production also helped complement it. I think from there, the perfect storm started and then we just had to make it a Syence track, right? So we had to go in there, make sure the drop and the chorus had that bass pop sound, flesh out the quality that we get. Zach does all our mixing and mastering, so also making sure that it's radio ready, from like a quality perspective in the final product. So I think when we work best, it's because we're inspired by something, and the best way we get inspired is by the vocal itself. And so A Little Bit Bored was just the perfect storm in that regard.
Yeah, and then I would just add too, like, as much as we are like by nature engineers in our background and we like to flesh things out and figure things out and plan accordingly, there is an element, like a huge element of good art that's just you can't really explain, you can't really plan for. And I think we're just finally comfortable enough as artists where like I kind of mentioned before, we can sort of create these like buckets of ideas where it's like, okay, we have this general idea of bass pop, certain things we want to make sure we achieve that are very achievable surface level. Like for instance, making sure the vocal is super catchy, right? That's just something that you can do objectively before you even start on the music or production of the music. But I think a lot of our music that does well and that ends up being our best, it's sort of just like it's just our natural, it's what we do. Like it's hard to explain sometimes, but we've been able to almost identify what we do by coining this idea of bass pop, but I don't necessarily feel like it's super orchestrated and super engineered. It's kind of just like what comes out of us is now, and more than ever what's been flowing out of us the last like year, and hopefully to continue because we really really like it. And I don't know if that makes sense, but it's kind of just like there's only so much we can, even be thinking when we make music, right? Like at some point,
Yeah.
you stop thinking and you just have to do what you do and hope that what you do is dope. And for whatever, whatever your goals are, hope that it will lead you to your goals, no matter what those are, no matter how, like, obviously, like there's like commercial success goals, there's, self-fulfilling goals, like all of those different things are valid. And you just got to kind of do you and hope.
Yeah, and it's funny because that's why like our best songs to date were all made in like 5 hours. I mean, not the finished product, but in terms of the creative idea from a production perspective, almost all our best songs happened in a 5 hour session. And then, all we had to do for the next session was come in, kind of mix master, maybe add a few ear candy elements or whatever, and then it's done. We typically, the songs we're not as satisfied with are the ones that we go in 5, 6 sessions before we get technically a finished production. You know what I mean? And I think that's basically what Zach is saying is those 5 hour sessions where we come out with a finished song. It's almost like our brains were like turned off or we blacked out and we come out of the session with this finished song that already fits the vision of bass pop and Syence because it's become second nature in how we produce now. We're not thinking as much about how to get there. It's just kind of built into us. And in the best sessions we have, that kind of built-in knowledge just comes out, and then all of a sudden, wow, we have a great finished song. We just finished another remix the other day, and that one, Zach, I think took what, 5 hours, 52 minutes. You timed it.
Yeah,
So
we were interested in how long it would take. So I think it was like 6 hours and something. But
yeah,
we went
yeah,
bad.
and it's killer. It's super good. I'm stoked on that one too. So yeah, I think, and most producers I know would agree, the best songs they make happen like. That's why you hear about like all-nighter sessions, because you're just so inspired and like all these ideas are flowing out and they all work and they sound great. And then you wake up in the morning like, wow, you finished the whole song. Holy shit.
Yeah. And I definitely do love what you're saying, because it is true. I feel like across the board, no matter who I've talked to, they do recognize that there are moments where you're just not feeling it, but there are moments where you're able to just have the insight to let go and just trust your instincts and not even care what will happen. You're just like, fuck it. This is what I want to do. And just turns out that what you did, everybody resonated with. But there's also that chance that people might not. But it seems to me that across the board, whenever a song hits, usually it's because the creators were able to get out of their own way. You know what I mean? And they were able to just like, hey, this is what I want to make. This is me. I don't care what happens. This is me. And let's do the whole motions, but it's still going to be me. And I think that's
Yeah.
really great.
I know Icon Production School in Los Angeles. I think they have a class called Art of the Flow, and it's like literally teaching producers how to just get out of the way of yourself and like let the ideas flow out. Zach, I don't know if you know more because you're in the teaching space.
Yeah,
That,
yeah.
but
I think you're right. I think it's called
yeah,
Art Flow. I teach a similar concept to like all the students that I teach, and yeah, I mean exactly. Like you're just as an artist, no matter what your art form is, but I mean we're obviously talking about music. You just have to like do you and like get into it, and the more skills you have and the more time you spend doing it, just the better you're gonna be at whatever you end up making in that time. And I mean, well, fortunately, Brandon and I are also like, when we finish something that we love, we can go back and kind of analyze it. I think maybe a little bit more than a lot of artists who are really good at creating, but not necessarily really good at analyzing what they created. And I think that's helped us because we make something dope. We're like, okay, why is this so sick? What can we keep like doing about it? Even everything down from like taking sounds from other songs, like a bunch of the music we're sitting on right now. There's a few elements and sounds that we would like we've used over and over again to kind of help create that cohesiveness. And we do it in different ways. No two songs sound the same by any means, but even if it's just like one sample that you're using that's like the same sample that you pitch in a different way or reverse or something, it just helps tie together that cohesiveness. And it really just makes it a lot easier, I think, to build upon each release and as an artist too, to just build upon your own idea making and again just make better decisions in the production room or if you're a writer when you're writing. It doesn't really matter, just in any case.
Yeah. I gotta say, you guys are very, very smart individuals, and I love the way you approach music. I feel like you guys were interviewing me because you guys definitely just took command of this podcast, and I love it. I absolutely love the way you guys think, and we need to get you guys back on when you have more time. I know you guys have a very busy day, but I do appreciate the time that we got to spend to just explore your brains a little bit, because I do feel like your story is unique, and it is unique amongst what most creatives want to do. And to me, it's important to show everybody different sides, different ways of thinking, different ways of doing things, so that everyone can just learn to embrace themselves, which you have done very, very beautifully. And I love that it's working for you. And I think it shows with your personality how, I don't want to say carefree, but to me, I know instinctually and almost instantly, you guys know where you want to go, you know who you are, you know what to make, and you're just going for it. There's no question about it, which can be a struggle for a lot of artists. So I just want to take this moment to say thank you for being honest and for just taking time out of your day to just talk about yourselves. It's really cool.
Thank you, man. No, it's been great. We're having a great time.
Awesome.
yeah, no,
Well,
thank you.
yeah, well, to end things off, I'd love to just kind of talk about what are some of the things you have going on. I know you mentioned a remix. You have 12 songs coming. I know that you have a performance coming up, but by the time that this is published, the performance might have already happened. But we can talk about that too. Let me know, what do you guys have on your plate right now?
Yeah, we have a lot on the plate. So the performance you're talking about, we're opening up, or not open, we're direct support for Weathen, who's an artist kind of in a similar lane to us. We actually have the same agent now. Playing a show, a drive-in show with him in Anaheim next Saturday. So a week from 2 days from now, I guess. Or I guess, yeah, it doesn't matter.
The 19th, in case this airs
19th
after.
of March. And that's gonna be awesome. It's our first show in like over a year, basically. With the pandemic, we obviously didn't play any shows, and we're still kind of in the pandemic. So, but it's a drive-in show, so it's super safe, super, super well done. And then, like you said, we have a ton of music. I think, if there's anything I could say to summarize what's on the horizon for Syence is that there's going to be just a shitload more songs and a bunch more performances. I mean, and that is kind of where we're headed. We're just going to start touring a lot more, playing all over, hopefully. And, as long as things open back up again, like we're all hoping they will. And, we got a lot of music that's going to come out and hopefully just really help build our fan base and, just make people have a good time. That's really all we're here to do.
Yeah, I think like looking back retroactively, regardless of when this airs, we're still in the middle of a release of A Little Bit Bored with Hitco. I think it came out on the 18th or 19th. I can't remember the date, but just following that, there's obviously a lot of stuff going on in terms of content and things like that. And we're potentially going to release a club version of that, or at least use it in our shows. We'll see what happens there. And as Zach mentioned, just sitting on a ton of new music, so starting to think about how we're going to get that out to the world as best as possible without rushing things. I think again with COVID and the pandemic, we're trying to be patient, but also ready to show the world all this music we've made, pretty much all during the pandemic as well. So it's definitely reflecting, I guess, what we were going through to an extent the last year. So that's really what's on the horizon for us, and I'm sure a lot more that we're not even aware of yet.
I love it. You guys are busy, and I think that you deserve it. And I know you guys are going to do some really cool things. So I just want to say, Braden and Zach, Syence, thank you so much for joining me on the Nebula Music Podcast. It's been a pleasure exploring your story, and I can't wait till I have you guys back on. We're going to have a great time as well.
Awesome. Thank you, man.
Right on. Thanks, Eddie.